Well, good morning. My name is Ala McCoy. I am Director of Startup Support at the University of Maryland's UM Ventures. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who joined us today for the next installment in Startup Fundamentals Workshop Series, both live webinar audience and those watching a recorded version on our Startup UMD YouTube channel. This workshop series is offered in partnership with the Center for Global Business at the Robert H. Smith School of Business. To everyone attending the live session, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. You should be able to find that at the bottom of your screen. Since we are recording, it will be posted on our Startup UMD YouTube channel. You have an opportunity to submit your questions anonymously. Just select that option if you would like to. At the end of the session, you will be able to raise your hand and ask your question live if you prefer to do it that way as well. So today, I am pleased to welcome Rebecca Bellinger, Executive Director of the Center for Global Business at the Smith School of Business. And Rebecca will introduce our speaker and the topic of discussion for the session. So thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Ala, for introducing us and allowing us to be part of this fantastic series that you run out of UM Ventures. Thank you to the audience for being here. This is the second installment of this particular series that we started in the fall to help startups and small businesses prepare to go global, as I like to say, or reach global markets. The Center for Global Business that I run is a center of excellence here at the Robert H. Smith School of Business, and we simultaneously serve as a national resource and a local resource here in Maryland, thanks to a Title VI cyber grant administered by the U.S. Department of Education. And through this grant, we train students in global mindset, international business education. We do thought leadership and research around the same topics. And directly related to today's content, we help small, medium-sized enterprises, startups build capacity to be successful in the global marketplace. So I am delighted to welcome again to the University of Maryland via Zoom, my dear friend and colleague, Kellie Greene, who hails all the way from upstate New York to join us today. Kellie is the president of Harvest Global Trading, LLC, and leads training and consulting on global trade for clients around the world in both importing and exporting. She also serves as a certified senior business advisor with the North Central Small Business Development Center, or SBDC, in Syracuse, New York. And from where I know her, she serves on the board of governors of NASBITE International. Her credentials really precede her. She has over 30 years of professional experience in global trade in both the corporate world and as an entrepreneur herself. And as we will see, she is well-versed in all areas of global trade. Kellie, I could read your entire bio, but I think that your content here is going to speak for itself. So Kellie, again, welcome to the University of Maryland, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rebecca. And yeah, don't read the whole thing. And whenever I hear that 30 years, I'm reminded of just how old I am. So that's not necessarily a good thing. Can we just say 10 maybe, right? I have 10 years and then I'll be 20 again or 30. So it's great to be here as always. Thank you for asking me to do this. I appreciate you all so much. I love talking about global trade. It is my passion, so I could talk about this all day, but I will spare you and we will keep it a little bit short. I started my timer so that I will leave plenty of time for questions should you have them. So we are talking today about getting your startup export ready, but I want to be clear that this really applies whether you're literally in the startup phase and still planning and you haven't even opened your doors yet, or whether or not you are actually already in business and you're thinking about going into an international market. This will apply to you either way. So real briefly, my top focus today is really on how to assess your export readiness, because there are some things that you need to take into consideration, both internal and external. And we'll talk about those things a little bit, kind of like a checklist. And it's not by any means maybe an exclusive checklist. It's designed to be pretty broad because, you know, you could be in a lot of different types of industries. So there might be additional things that you should look at that are specific to your business. But we're going to really take a pretty high level look at at some of the key things that absolutely will help you get ready to be successful if you want to go into international markets. I'm going to talk a little bit in the beginning about why, if you haven't really thought about going global, you should. And I do realize with the news these days and a lot of tariff talk, it might be a little bit of a scary time for some people to think, well, geez, maybe this isn't the time to get into global trade. So let me assure you that tariffs are not a new thing. We might be hearing more about it today because it is fast and furious and it's, you know, it's big and it's broad. But the reality is they've been around for a very long time and they are probably not going to go away for some countries. So even if it settles down here in the United States, those are things that you do have to consider and look at when going global. But I don't want it to discourage you. You know, it's a little unsettled right now. I think we all know that. People are nervous, but going global has a lot of advantages. And I want to share some of those advantages with you because statistics don't lie. They're born over time, and that includes maybe some difficult times. And then we will talk primarily about how to assess your readiness and what it looks like when developing your strategy. Okay, so first, the important thing, why go global? And I did talk about this a little bit in the last session, but I want to give you a little bit more data than maybe I shared last time. Number one reason, it's increased revenue and market share, right? So we all know that if you can increase your market, even here in the United States, and get additional customers or a different target market, you're going to increase your growth. But companies that expand internationally have an average revenue growth of 20% within the first year. That is unbelievably large. And just imagine what that translates to if you do that over the long term. Obviously, it diversifies your risk, mitigates your risk. Some people say, well, not right now or during the pandemic. Okay, but those are exceptions. When we look at it over time, the businesses that operate in multiple regions of the world, they're 31% less vulnerable to market and economic downturns in any one single market. You know, we may be having problems in the United States, but just imagine if you were in other countries, that may offset some of your risk for what is happening domestically. And exporting firms are 20% less likely, not likely, less likely to fail during recessions compared to domestic only businesses. That alone should give you a lot of encouragement to look at this. Gives you a competitive advantage. 87% of companies that expand globally report having a stronger brand presence and increased industry influence. You're more known. You can say, I'm a global brand, I'm a global company, as opposed to, you know, mom and pop shop. So even if you are small and mom and pop shop, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, because a lot of you think you're too small. And I'm going to kind of dispel that in a moment. But the higher survival rates too for exporting businesses, 60% of businesses, small businesses that export, are more likely to survive over that 5-year period compared to non-exporting companies. And again, not to scare those of you who may be in the startup phase for your business, even here in the United States, but the harsh reality is that the 5-year survival rate of businesses, especially small businesses, is not great. It's only about 5%. 95% tend to fail in the first 5 years, which again is why it's so important that you do training like this and take advantage of the resources that are out there to help you be successful, because that's what they're there for. But imagine how you could lower your risk of going out of business. And so that you're not in the 5%, right? You know, that survived. You're not just in that 5%. Maybe you're in a higher percentage. Well, 60% of you, if you are exporting, are more likely to survive that 5-year period. That's a huge number. And companies that export grow 17% faster and 8.5% less likely to go out of business altogether at any point in their lifetime, compared to non-exporters. So all of these statistics alone should give you a lot of encouragement that sending your products into a global market might be something that you should really give some serious consideration to. Okay, so the big question, but I'm too small. And if you're sitting here and you're like, I haven't even started yet, so of course I'm too small. I might be a one-person show, or I might have 10 people or 20 people. I'm too small. I can't possibly go into a global market. I need hundreds of employees. Well, no, you don't. because according to the Small Business Administration, 98% of all US exporters are actually what they determine as small businesses. Now, you may think under 500 employees is not that small, and you're right, that's actually a good sized company. We might call that more of a mid-sized company. And those businesses that qualify are, 33% of all total US export value, and that's more than 287,000 small businesses. However, if you're thinking, yeah, but again, I'm the 1 to 20 or 1 to 50, well, relax, because according to the Census Bureau, that's still 93% of exporters that are under 100 employees. And yep, if you're in that under 20 employees, that's still between 70 and 75%, or around 200,000 of those small businesses that are engaged in exporting. So if you're under 20 employees, you are not too small to go global. Not according to the statistics. That is still the vast majority of companies in the United States that are exporting. 70 to 75% are under 20 employees. So let that sink in. You're not too small. So how exactly do you get export ready? And again, I'm talking to you both as maybe a startup who doesn't even have your business off the ground yet, as well as somebody who's already in business. I want you to take this away from you in terms of the strategic reasons to get export ready. And simply put, export readiness is just your ability to successfully expand into international markets. Keyword there is successfully, because a lot of you might accidentally fall into exporting. We see this a lot with people. Companies often end up doing exporting accidentally because somebody finds you online and calls you up from Uzbekistan and says, hey, I want to buy your product. And you suddenly find yourself chasing your tail, figuring out how to sell to Uzbekistan or whatever country it is. And that's what we're trying to get you to not do here. We want you to start thinking now strategically about how to be successful so that you don't do what so many companies do. They accidentally get into exporting and they basically build the plane while they're flying it. And guess what happens? Sometimes that plane crashes. And I've met so many small businesses who say, well, yeah, I tried that exporting thing and it didn't work out for me. And I'm like, well, why didn't it work out for you? And very often the excuses and the things that they're giving me are, well, it got stuck in customs. I didn't realize all of the regulations. I didn't get paid, right? These are the things that happen because they didn't know what they didn't know. And you've heard the phrase knowledge is power. So we're going to give you that knowledge to be able to start strategically planning well before you get that call from somewhere around the world, or somebody places an order on your internet site and you're suddenly going, well, how the heck do I do this? And you make the mistakes and do it wrong, get yourself in trouble, or find out that, you know what, this is way more than I want to deal with. Starting right is the way to do this. Assessing your readiness really involves looking at those both internal factors to your company and doing an external evaluation. And so what I'm going to go over right now for you is really kind of a checklist of some of the top line areas that you should be looking at and considering when you're building your plan. And the first is management commitment. Now, I always start with this one because if you don't have that commitment from the top of the organization, and if you are the entrepreneur that we're talking to right now, guess what? That means you. You are the leadership team. But as you grow, if you even hire other people to run your organization as a chief operating officer, everybody has to be on the same page here. And it has to be a true commitment. Does that leadership team, you and your partners and your employees that are at the top, do you have a clear international growth strategy? And if you don't, this is where you need to actually start planning now for what that looks like. And are you committed, right? Are the decision makers in your business experienced in handling international business challenges? And you may be thinking to yourself right now, nope, I know absolutely nothing. Well, the good news is you can get yourself ready, and there's lots of training out there. Webinar series such as this. Rebecca and I both serve on NASBITE, a great organization for you. But even the government agencies have a ton of webinars and trainings that are out there, most of the time free, that you can watch and learn and get to know some of the things that you need to know for going global before you go global. So is there a long-term commitment to going global? Or, as I said, is this a one-off? You get a phone call from somebody around the world who wants to buy your product, because you are not as likely to succeed on those one-offs because, again, you're not taking it as a strategic plan. So you're more likely to succeed if you plan from a long-term commitment. And is the overall leadership committed to developing in those export markets and willing, keywords here, willing and able to dedicate time and resources. And those resources are both the time, the people, and yep, put your money where your mouth is, because there is often money that has to go into going global. But you have to make those decisions up front about how serious you are about doing this. Going along with that is your organizational readiness. Do you have employees with international business experience? Again, if you don't, the training is available for you, often for little to no cost, to help get them up to speed with the things that they're going to need to know. Just as important is, can you handle that cross-cultural management and potential language barriers? Now, the good news is English is widely spoken around the world, but remember, it might not be somebody's first language. So having employees and management that can understand some of those things, and more important, I would even argue, than the language, is the cross-cultural. I'm going to give you an example. I used to work for Carrier Corporation, big air conditioning company. Some of you probably have them in your homes or your places of business. And when I worked at Carrier earlier on in my career, when I was younger, we were buying supplies from Japan. Now, this was more of an import than selling, but it's a perfect example to this cross-cultural understanding. And I had lived in Japan, so I understood the cultural basis. I spent 4 years there, so I understood. And I'm sitting in my boss's office. I was brand new there, and he's getting very frustrated with this guy in Japan because he kept being delayed on getting us these orders. And as you know, if you're running a manufacturing company, you kind of need your stuff to come in so you don't shut your plant down. And this guy was constantly committing and then not actually delivering in time. And I was sat there and I listened to this conversation with my boss and this guy in Japan, and he was saying yes, 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 yes. And I'm listening and I'm thinking, okay, but he's saying yes, but he's not actually doing it. Well, the one thing I know about the Asian culture, especially the Japanese, they don't like to say no. So instead of saying no, they say yes, and then they apologize later when they don't deliver. So I flipped the script on that conversation, and my boss was, getting angry and was like, okay, yes, you promised that this is going to be. And I said, okay, Bruce, shush for a minute. And I said to this gentleman, I said, so when can you deliver the product? And all of a sudden his voice changed a little. He's like, oh, maybe. Oh, now it's not a definite. And he kept changing. And then he goes, well, yes, I can do this. And when I gave him the opportunity to say what he could do, he wasn't now able to commit to what he had previously said he would do. So what we couldn't see back then, because I'm dating myself here, we didn't have the internet, so we couldn't see each other like we can see now with Zoom calls. It was all on the phone. You couldn't see that body language. So he was probably shaking his head, no way, can't do this, right? But you have to understand the culture and the body language and be able to read what might not be coming out in the voice, right? In the words. And so some of those things come into play, and understanding that is really important. So it might mean that you have to hire that local talent or somebody in a foreign office, or even hiring somebody here in the United States that understands that culture that you're looking to go in so that they can help you bridge those gaps. And if you're going to establish foreign offices, you might need to understand what the rules and the regulations are and how that's going to work from a management standpoint. Can your customer support, if you have customer service, handle those different time zones? Because remember, you're talking sometimes 12-hour time differences. Are you going to have customer service all night long to be able to support that? And can they handle if there are language differences? Do you need to hire somebody with the language skills? So we've talked already now about the management, the organization, and that's not meant to scare you. It doesn't mean you need to go hire 25 people. But these are things that you need to consider. How are you going to handle these things? And there are a multitude of ways. Sometimes you can hire people and outsource things. But what is the right strategy for your business is going to depend very much on how much business you're planning to do and what kind of business you're in. So let's talk about the big thing, though, your products or your services, because it can also be service exports. This is really important for you to understand that your products may need to be adapted. But I always ask this question first. Do you actually have a product or service that is successful in the domestic US market? Now, again, for those of you who are truly in the startup phase, you probably don't know the answer to that yet. But why? And by the way, some people do actually start in exporting. Very few people do that before they do the US or at the same time. Usually, if you're going to start exporting right away, it's because you've identified that your product is necessary in a certain market. There was a gentleman who won the E Award, which in the United States for exporting is the highest award you can receive. And by the way, Rebecca Bellinger has won that award. So go, Rebecca, on this call at the University of Maryland. So congratulations, Rebecca. But a gentleman who won last year in Georgia, who runs a company called Spectrum International, not to be confused with your cable company. For those of you who live in the Spectrum cable market, it is not that. This is an eyeglass type company. He does not do any business at all in the United States. He started his business internationally, and I think he's in like 60 or 80 countries right now. But so he's an anomaly. He is one of those companies that truly started knowing that there was an international market for his products, not even really selling here in the United States. But that's not common. Usually you would start in the US and then expand into an international market. For most of you, that is the way that you will do that. So I asked the question if it's successful in the US market, because it doesn't necessarily mean if you're successful here, you're going to be successful internationally. It does not mean that. But what happens in your business, and those of you who are real new in business, I've already probably found out that, you know what, I thought it was going to be this way, and I've already had to pivot and do this. One of my clients that I work with here, it's a domestic restaurant. And when she opened her restaurant, she was very determined. She was only going to be breakfast and lunch. She just celebrated her 1 year anniversary. And guess what? She's already doing dinner. She did not want to do dinner. But guess what? She pivoted because that's what the customer wanted. So a lot of times you'll start your product or your service here in the United States thinking that you know exactly how it's going to go. But guess what? The customer may tell you different, right? You may need to modify things. So you're already going to learn in the domestic market about having to pivot and change and what works and what doesn't. And that will serve you well in an international market. Again, it does not mean you're necessarily going to be successful just because you are in the US, but having a little bit of that knowledge under your belt in the first couple of years of doing business may actually help you when you hit some of those things you have to change or pivot in the international market. So I always ask that question first. But very important is, can your product or service be easily adapted to a different market, whether it be the language, because you will almost always have to put your labeling in a foreign language if it's Spanish or French or Arabic, right? You're going to have to do that. The culture that we already talked about. And of course, there's regulations. So if you are doing something that is food related or cosmetics, almost certainly I can promise you, you're going to have to modify your ingredients, because every country of the world, just like we do here with our FDA, they all have requirements and regulations around the ingredients that can be in the products. And you would be surprised that it is extremely hard to, for example, export cosmetics products, things that go on your face and your hair and your skin, and those things like hand lotion. Trying to export that from the United States and into the European Union is extremely difficult. In fact, it takes 2 years, around 2 years, to get the certification to even sell the product in Europe, because it has to go through all this testing. On the other hand, if you're exporting a food product to Europe, it's actually easier to get food products into Europe than cosmetics. Guess what? If you are importing into the United States, it's the reverse. It's harder to get food products in than cosmetics. It's actually really easy to get cosmetics. So we care less about what goes on your skin here than what goes in your body. And it's the opposite in the European Union. So again, you may have to modify your products. And I talked about this in our last webinar. If you are making something that's with an electrical outlet, I can guarantee you, you may have to modify that, right? Because the electrical outlets, for any of you who have traveled internationally, you have that adapter that, if you're like me, nobody can figure out exactly how to work it. And there's all these little prongs and you're like, what the heck is this thing? Well, guess what? If you have a product that's got an electrical outlet, you may need to modify that product before selling it overseas. Your product packaging might also need to be changed for a couple of reasons. One, we already mentioned the labeling, but remember, we don't use the metric system here in the United States. Well, surprise, Everybody else around the world does. And packaging size. So we may like things in big packages because we're Americans. I'll admit I like Costco. I like things in bulk. But in a lot of these foreign countries, they want things in smaller packages. So you may have to change the packaging, the size, the look. And you also need to take into consideration, yes, the import regulations, but also cultural preferences. So if any of you have ever been to Japan, I like to pick on Japan because I lived there for 4 years. Um, it was probably my first or my second day in Japan. I went to a vending machine and I got a Coca-Cola. So if you are a Coca-Cola fan, you know what Coca-Cola tastes like. Well, if you go to Japan, I will warn you, get a Coca-Cola, but prepare yourself because I took a big drink of that Coca-Cola and I kid you not, I spit it out right there on the street. It was a shock to my system because it was like drinking a big mouthful of sugar. It did not taste like Coca-Cola. Apparently, the Japanese like sugary beverages. I did not know that, but I could not drink Coke at all when I was in Japan. So, do you have to change the color palette or do you have to change something about your food, even not just your ingredients, but maybe how it tastes to suit to meet to the requirements and what they want in that culture? Again, import regulations, they vary from your packaging requirements and the size and what has to be on them. But there's also other regulations that you're going to have to take into consideration, such as is it even legal for you to import that product? Yes, there could be, forget the tariffs, some items that are banned and that you can't even import into a foreign country. And sometimes it doesn't even make sense what they're banning for. It could be a competitive thing, much like a tariff. Sometimes they have a private industry that they're trying to protect and they say, no, you're not allowed to import here. So you do need to understand that. And again, is there a demand for your product or service in a target market internationally? It may work great in the United States. That does not necessarily mean that it's going to work even in Canada. Now, maybe it would because Canada is very similar to the United States. But if you go into France, believe it or not, something that works here may not work there. This is where you do need to do market research. You also need to understand if there's any compliance regulations with exporting. Now, we always talk about the importing requirements, but make no mistake, there are exporting requirements for some products from the United States. And while most products are what we call NLR, no license required, if you are in the chemical industry or if you are doing anything with what we call dual use technology, and remember drones, remember back, 15 years ago, drones were toys. They still are, but now they're dropping bombs. So you may be required to get an export license from the United States, which is totally independent from even what you have to do to get into a foreign market. So it's very important that you understand those compliance challenges here as well as what you may have to deal with overseas. And again, I'm not trying to scare you into thinking that this is a daunting task because I know there's a lot here. This is really just to be an outline of the things to consider in your strategy so that you can be successful and you don't get surprised on something that you didn't think about. So I hope I'm not scaring you. You also need to look at your operations capacity and your supply chain, right? Big one, big one is your current production capacity. Can you scale to be able to handle the export demand? Because that's kind of important. A lot of people decide they're going to go out there, they're going to, find the customers, and then they'll worry about how to make it. Well, that's the wrong time to worry about it. If anybody's ever watched Shark Tank, and I know most of you probably have, or at least are familiar with the show, right? You have a lot of people that will go on there and they say, well, I started my business and I've got orders, but I don't have enough inventory and I need the money for inventory. So they've been out marketing and they've been getting the business, but they don't have enough capacity to meet the demand. So now they need that money so that they can go buy more supplies. Well, it's the same thing if somebody orders from you. Can you meet that demand on an export? Because that's the wrong time after you get the order to start chasing your tail to figure out, can we do this? Sounds great, get the order and then figure it out. But in reality, it doesn't work and you can damage your credibility and the ability to actually sell to that client as well as others in that market going forward. You're going to get a bad reputation. So you want to look at that production capacity. Can you scale with what you have now? Or how would you scale? Think about that strategically. And can your logistics department, or however you're handling your logistics, handle that increased demand for those international markets? Again, just like your capacity with your production, can your employees handle that? or whoever you've outsourced to? And do they have the knowledge in the shipping overseas to reliably do that? And do you have the right supply chain partners? You may be dealing with a lot of domestic companies that can help you with your shipping and trucking companies. That's great. You're using C.H. Robinson, and C.H. Robinson does have a global division, but that might not be the right partner. Just because they work domestically, they may not be the right partner for your international supply chain. So, lining up your freight forwarders and your import brokers and figuring that out, if you're not already working with a company that can expand globally, is really important. And are you prepared for those things like delays and, oh, yeah, the big word of the day, tariffs? Customs regulations, labeling, documentation requirements, and yeah, things that may be changing, right? You may start going into a market today. What happens when something happens like a tariff? Are you prepared for shifting and handling that? Have you built those contingencies into your plan? You can't always build every contingency because not everything like a pandemic can be predicted. But certainly you want to be able to know how to handle risk and look at the geopolitical situation. If you are starting to do business in a country, and I'm not telling you not to sell to China, because by the way, China is actually a potentially good market for a lot of you to sell to. But ask yourself, we've got not only a tariff war, but we also have some geopolitical tensions there. Is that the right market? And if it is for you, because there's opportunities, how do you prepare yourself for things that could happen? And how do you overcome those? And a really big issue for a lot of you is how are you going to accept those returns and potential repairs, depending on what your product is? If you're like me and you buy everything under the sun from Amazon, occasionally you have a return. Well, if you're going to be selling in e-commerce, or even if you're selling, just via a website, a whole container load of equipment, well, what if they need to return it or they want repairs? How are you going to handle that when they're on the other side of the world? Having a strategy for that is also important. Financial. Nobody ever wants to talk about the money, or they always want to talk about the money, right? They want to talk about the money when they have it and they want to know how to get it. And the one question that every business advisor at every SBDC, and probably Rebecca at your global center too, gets asked is, are there any grants? Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about grants today, but yes, there are some grants for exporting. The STEP grant is the most common, and it's not a ton of money, but it is out there and is something you certainly should look into. But there are other things besides grants, and often you will have to come out of pocket for potentially a decent amount of money. There are loans. The SBA offers some export loans for your export business as well. So don't think you necessarily have to have it all in your pocket. There are things out there that can help finance your export, but you have to be willing to take that leap, right? It's just like starting a business. Sometimes you take a business loan and you're feeling a little nervous, which you should if you're taking a big loan to start your business, right? My boss always says at the SBDC here, if you're not a little nervous when you're taking out a big loan for your business, then you're doing it wrong, right? Because hello, if you're taking $500,000 or more, yeah, you should be a little nervous. It's a big investment. And if you believe in this international expansion, you may need some money to do that in order to do it right and be successful. So the question then is, do you have the capital to support this? Whether it be the market entry costs, doing the compliance, your shipping costs, because sometimes you have to pay for the shipping depending on the terms of trade that you have with your clients and your customers overseas. And we're not going to talk about Incoterms here, but the key thing about Incoterms is understanding what your responsibility is. Sometimes you have to pay for all of that to get it to the other side. Certainly, you're probably going to pass that cost on to your customer, but what then are your payment terms? You may have to wait, right? So having that capital and cash flow is really important to be able to support your international expansion. And can your business sustain any initial losses before turning a profit in the new markets? Because again, sometimes you got to spend money to make money. And this is what we're talking about. Just like when you start your business domestically, you may not make money profit-wise in the first year. Going international is very much like starting a brand new business. But it is worth it if you think back to those statistics that I mentioned, right? Do you have access to the international funding or trade finance? Again, there are finance options out there via the SBA. A lot of banks, Ex-Im Bank also has some things that you can look into, because that goes into the next point of, does your company have knowledge and experience in export payment methods, such as letters of credit and credit risk insurance? And again, Lots of training out there for you and lots of resources with government agencies. Exim Bank provides a great credit risk insurance product that I would highly recommend, that if you are going to sell overseas and you have a company overseas that does not want to pay you cash up front, that you strongly look into getting credit risk insurance. It will save you a lot of headaches. Legal and regulatory compliance. Are you aware of the requirements and trade regulations in the foreign market? Don't take an order. My number one suggestion to you is, if you get that call from, I don't know why I'm picking on Uzbekistan, except it sounds good. It doesn't matter what the country is. You get the call from them and they want to buy from you. Before you take that order, you want to make sure you understand the legal requirements and trade regulations. Again, this should be part of a bigger strategy. If you set that strategy early on in your business for how you're going to handle these things and what your answer is going to be and how you look and do the research on that market, then it's going to make it a lot easier when you get that call and you're not chasing that rolling ball down a hill. Can your business comply with tax laws and tariff requirements? Do you have intellectual property internationally? So you may have a patent or a trademark in the United States, but that does not protect you internationally. And just as a little plug for the other sessions that we are doing that are coming up over the next couple of months, I believe the last one we are doing is how to protect yourself in intellectual property before you go global. So you might want to put that on your calendar. Do you have access to legal expertise for those contracts and agreements? Because guess what? You are now dealing with laws that span not just the United States, but what if your contract is actually written under the laws of a foreign country? You need to have somebody who understands international trade law to be able to read those contracts and agreements. And does your company have knowledge, again, of those US export controls that I mentioned earlier? You may have to license here in the United States. Oh, the fun thing. We are in an age of technology and AI and everything else, right? So you are dealing right now with trying to sell cross border, and your website may be getting traction, but your e-commerce platform, is it ready to accept those international transactions and payments? And for that matter, back to finance, what currency are you accepting those payments in? And how do you protect yourself against currency fluctuations if it's not in US dollars? Do you have those cybersecurity measures to protect your transactions and that data? Because that's also going to be important in every country of the world. Surprise, they have different rules. Is your brand image and your messaging and your pricing adaptable to different cultures? Now, this is really important. Best example I can give you is that I have a client who sells barbecue rubs and, seasonings. Well, he has a little piggy for his logo. Probably not going to work in a Muslim country. And yes, they might not eat all of the same meats, but barbecue seasonings can be used in a lot of different products, including fish. If you are trying to sell to those cultures and those countries, that little piggy of your marketing message may need to be adapted for a more broad audience. Can you localize your website and your packaging? And that customer support we talked about. Can you have people who are available in those languages and available 24 hours a day to be able to take those calls in different time zones? Can you make your website very customized to that market so that you have them, if you've ever logged on to a website and it's in Chinese or French, because I like to buy French foods and French, I love Belgian chocolate, so we'll use that one, right? And it's always in French. But if you notice up at the top, it says I can click and it'll give me English. Thank you, because my French is really not that good. So this way I can look at it and it's localized now to my preferences. So you may need to invest in that as well. Do you understand the local consumer behavior and who is your competition in that market? It's very rare, not impossible, but it's rare that you're going to enter into a market where there's not some competition, if not direct competition with the exact same product, but it could be an ancillary, indirect competition. Think McDonald's and Burger King. They're a little bit different, but they're kind of the same. And then you think, well, Chipotle is not the same as McDonald's, but it's still kind of in that fast food space. So you may be in a space where you don't have a direct competitor, but maybe you have an indirect competitor that is similar. And would that consumer actually come to you in light of the other choices that are available? All right. that was the checklist that I really kind of wanted to go through of some of the things that you should consider in developing this overall strategy before you go global and to have. And the key components of developing your export strategy, again, you look at all of those little things on the checklist, some that may apply to you, some that may not. For example, US export regulations, you may have more or less of those depending on your product. But it's really important that when you sit down to do this, you establish clear goals. What is the objective? What are you trying to achieve with your international expansion? Are you trying to hit a certain revenue numbers? Are you trying to grow your market or your brand recognition? What is that market analysis? Understanding the demand, the competitors, your regulations, the cultural nuances in those target markets. And as another plug to the next one in the series, the one that we are doing, I believe it is March 26th, but I know Rebecca can comment on this. I believe it's coming up on March 26th, is on market research. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I hope you'll join us for that. And also financial planning. Again, do you have the necessary funds to cover these things? And how would you get the funds if you don't have them through those other resources? Local partnerships. Getting partnerships in the country that you want to go to can often be a key to major success, whether it's a distributor or an agent, or finding business partners, or even just people that you know in that market that can help you navigate those markets a little bit more effectively. And ongoing monitoring and flexibility. Remember, you may have to adapt your approach based on the market performance and also on some of the circumstances like tariffs that may change. Best resource I can give you for this is to go to trade.gov. It is the website of the International Trade Administration. There's a whole exporter assessment that you can do there that covers so much of what I just went through and sort of that checklist type mentality. And of course, if you would like these slides, I have no problem with Rebecca and Ala sharing those with you because it is designed to be that sort of checklist and the high level things that you should be looking at. But I did want to make sure that you knew that there is an exporter assessment and there are tools and resources available to you at trade.gov for you in terms of getting ready to go global and a whole bunch of training. This is my contact information. Should you have any questions, I wanted to put that up there for you. I do work for the Small Business Development Center, and I am also a global consultant with my own business. That is my cell phone and my personal email. Should you have any questions after this, feel free to email me or give me a call, and I'd be happy to try and answer your questions if I'm able, or to point you in the direction of somebody who can, if it's not me. And with that, I actually think I did it, Rebecca. I kept it to 45 minutes. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much for this, Kelly. And as everyone gets their questions ready, I will reiterate that I told you so. I told you, everyone, that Kelly, is a queen of all of this. She is very well versed in all of these issues related to helping a startup or a small business go global. So now is your chance to ask a question directly of one of the premier experts that we have in the country. Ala, I know that you said you had some questions. So as our audience gets ready with theirs, did you want to ask a question?
I think Rebecca may be overselling me just a little.
Don't be modest.
No,
I'm being real.
well, first of all, thank you so much, Kelly. And thank you, Rebecca, for bringing this series to us. And I just posted a link to register for the March 26th session. So yes, Kelly, you're absolutely right. So March 26th at noon. It's a Wednesday, and I posted a registration link. So if you're interested in doing market research for export, please feel free to join that session. But I think we have a first question here from Europe, actually.
Oh.
So, and the question is, due to the latest developments in the United States, companies that are in Europe and selling software products into the U.S., are they obligated to the same tariffs as physical
Yes.
products?
Unfortunately, now, right now, so let me back this up a little bit. So right now we haven't actually, I think there's been talk about hitting Europe with the same 25% tariffs, but I don't think that's actually come yet. From my knowledge, it's been mostly Canada, Mexico, and China. So buckle up, Europe, you may be next, at least is the way the wind blows. What has been going on, at least with Canada and Mexico, has been an across the board 25% tariffs on everything. Which normally, if you look at our tariff schedule in any country of the world, the harmonized tariff system has different rates, right? So some products may have no duty because of existing free trade agreements that we may have between partner nations, or it could be 10% for one product and 25% for another. So it's not like everybody pays the same usually in tariffs. Now, again, when you slap a 25% tariff across everything, that changes the game, right? So if you are right now in Europe and you are exporting to the United States, where it's an import in the United States, currently, whatever duty is on that under the harmonized tariff system for your products and services is what you will pay. Your product is not going to be necessarily have the same duty as, cups and glassware, right? So you have to know what your duty rate is for your product. But if there is a blanket tariff that goes on against all products and services, yeah, software is going to be included. Anything coming in will be subject to potentially those rising tariffs that could go into place. So, like I said, it is a bit of a volatile time. It's a moving target. It's like a pendulum. Uh, so first we put the tariffs in on Canada and Mexico, then we backed off. That we put them in again, 2 days ago? Now we've backed off for another month. So um, my humble opinion, which is not necessarily the opinion of the governments or Rebecca or Ala, I will say it's my humble opinion, so they don't get in trouble for this. It's mine. I kind of think that this is a strong arm tactic, right, to get better overall trade agreements with the countries that are more favorable to the United States. Do I think that this is necessarily the best way to go about that? No, I don't. It's creating a lot of chaos for companies around the world. But again, I mean, this seems to be more of a negotiation strategy, which it's certainly not going to be well received by most American consumers, I can assure you, when they have to pay more at the store. So I don't think that my gut would be that this couldn't possibly be sustainable for a long-term strategy. It doesn't mean it won't hurt for a short-term strategy, but when companies are getting nervous about the long term, I always tell them to just kind of, we've already seen it switch from in a 24-hour basis. So that seems to indicate there's not an appetite here. The stock market doesn't like it. So my opinion and my guess is that this is more of a negotiation strategy. And I think that hopefully in the long term, it'll all sort of level out. So I wouldn't panic too much, but there might be a little short-term pain. That was kind of a long answer, but I know it's on everybody's mind. So
Yep, thank you. Yeah, I was at a conference recently, and there's a European company that's selling, they're trying to sell their software to tech transfer offices in the United States. And to avoid what you were talking about, actually, are they registered a U.S. company, and then the U.S. company will be the one selling it too. Is that a good strategy for?
honestly, the whole idea behind really what he's doing is he keeps saying, well, if they want to sell their products, they're going to have to move to the United States. So back in the 1980s, if you remember Ronald Reagan, for those of us who are old enough to remember Ronald Reagan, there was a trade war back then with Japan. And we often forget that because we always hear about China. But in the 80s, it was the automobile industry, right? So if you were alive in the 80s and you had a US vehicle, you know that the quality stunk. It was awful. And on comes Honda and Toyota with really good quality and competitive prices. And the US car industry was like, oh, no, 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 you can't do that. So rather than step up their quality, they went running to the president, Ronald Reagan, and said, you need to protect our industry, which is really the same as tariffs, right? That's all protectionism. So what Ronald Reagan did, he didn't do tariffs, he put a quota on Japanese car companies and said, you can only sell, I can't remember what the number was, but like 250,000 cars. That's it per year in the United States. What happens when you limit the supply, right? The price goes up. So US car companies were like, ha, there's only 250,000, so people will have to buy American cars because there's not enough Japanese cars. Well, Japan said, okay, we're going to open a factory in the United States. And yep, that is a legal way to get around the quota. So Japan became a US, Toyota moved, I believe the first plant was in Alabama, still is in Alabama. And they opened this big factory, and now they were making those cars in the United States, not subject to the quota. And so now what did the US car companies say? Well, you can't do that. And Ronald Reagan was like, yeah, they can. It's foreign direct investment and they are creating jobs. So you can't usually get around tariffs. Getting around tariffs is very, very difficult to do it legally. But the way you can is open your operations in the United States, but you actually have to physically have a business here in order to get around them and be selling from here. You can't be importing it from a foreign country. But that is one possible solution is, yep, set up a business in the United States, because if you're here, there's no tariffs.
Yep. Thank you. Rebecca, do you want to read the next question?
Sure. So the next question, I'm not quite sure I understand, but something about how do we make sure we have the freedom or the ability perhaps to operate in the importing company, and how do we make sure that we're not getting into issues with infringement?
Ah, okay. So in terms of like patent infringement
Freedom to
and things
operate.
like
Yeah.
that,
Good.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to want to do an extensive patent search, which it's not cheap, but you are going to want to hire somebody who can help you to do a patent search in those countries. Because again, we'll talk about this in the session that we're doing, I think, in May on protecting your global IP. But if you have a patent in the United States, that doesn't mean that somebody doesn't have that patent around the world. So you want to make sure that if you're going to go into a foreign country, you get a patent in that country. So the first rule is make sure that you can. And so you're going to want to do a patent search and make sure that you aren't infringing on that. If you have a patentable product, in most cases, if we're talking like food and things like that, it's hard to patent food, right? So really what we're talking about is technology and products that might be equipment or medical devices and things of that nature. And you would want to do that patent search anyway for yourself, because you would want to know that you could get a patent to protect yourself. It's not just infringing on other people. And just in general, the freedom to import. Again, trade.gov is a great resource to start. The US Commercial Service has country guides. I will just tell you there's a lot of resources, at least today, for right in the federal government. I'm not sure how many of these agencies will have all these resources going forward with all cuts that are coming. But honestly, one of the best things I always tell people is start with the US Commercial Service, right? If you're looking for regulations in the import of a foreign country, they often have offices in US embassies, the Foreign Commercial Service. And those people in those offices, along with maybe an import broker and a freight forwarder, can tell you what the regulations are going to be to get your products into those countries. So there's a lot of resources out there where you can get that information. Yes, everybody likes Google, but sometimes it's not the most accurate information unless you're looking at government sites. And that would be the other thing. Look at government sites for the country you're going to in terms of the regulations.
So great advice.
Hope I answered that question.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
I'll just add to Kellie's response here, or tag on, I guess, to something that Kellie said about where to start. Any of you who are startups, founders, you're on this webinar, if you need a resource to go to help connect you to these resources that Kellie is talking about, or you're interested in working with a group of consultants to take your exporting plan further, or even start one, which is what we're talking about today, please reach out to me at the Center for Global Business, the University of Maryland. I'll put my information in the chat, because this is some of the work that we do directly with startups and small businesses. We'd be happy to help you.
And I will just give Rebecca another plug because she won't plug it for herself, but she, as the director and that center, won the Presidential E Award. Was it last year?
It was last year. Thank you, Kelly.
And that, well, but people need to understand that is the highest award that any company or individual can get in the entire United States for exporting assistance and achievement. So for Rebecca to win that says a lot about her program. And of course, you know, I love you, Rebecca, anyway, because I think she's just a rock star and we work together on the NASBA board. But not every center wins that. Okay. There's a lot of centers around the country that have never won that. So take that with a grain of salt that you have an incredible resource in her and in the people in her department that can probably lead you down all of the right paths.
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you really to the University of Maryland community for allowing us to do that work.
Yes.
Yep, thank you. Well, do you have any? We have, I think, 3 more minutes. If anybody has a question, you can also raise your hand if you'd like and ask it that way. But if not, like that, I'm gonna lower my
I say,
hand
Alla, you
now.
just raised your hand.
I know. There's the about not the bottom, yeah, screen, and we'll see it. But if not, Rebecca, do you have Rebecca and Kelly, do you have any parting words?
I do have one question, and I don't know if you can give us like a 30-second answer given time. At what point should a startup, should a founder or group of founders start thinking about going global? A lot of times we hear, wait until you get your, established and find your market in your domestic market, and then think about global expansion. What do you think is the right or the best answer to that question?
I agree with you because I think you and I are on the same page with this, that if you are starting a business and you already kind of know if your product or service might have the opportunity to go global, and if you're not sure, that's a good opportunity while you're doing your market research and your business plan as you're starting up. And of course, at the SBDC, I deal with startup companies, restaurants, and everything. And I always tell people right away when they tell me what their product or services, I'm like, okay, and we need to start thinking about your global plan. And they're like, hey, what? I haven't even figured out how to do it locally. But I can always tell if they're going to have, like, they come with me with spices or food products. I know immediately if this is something that has an opportunity globally. And they think I'm crazy when I say, no, I want you to at least think about this. So I do think if you're in that startup phase, really look at your product or service and determine whether you think there might be an opportunity. Again, if you don't know, I'm sure Rebecca and her team can help you figure out if it's the kind of product or service that has export potential. You might not be able to pin down today every single country because that's a lot of research to do, but you should actually do some high level research, I think, to determine is there a market potential for this? And if you think that there is, build that into your strategy. I know when you go on a job interview, I always hate this question. What's your 5-year plan? I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. Like, what day is it today? And you want me to tell you where I want to be in 5 years? Guess what? I tell entrepreneurs all the time, you probably don't know where you're going to be in 5 years either, even on just a domestic plan. The business plan is a roadmap, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stay on that roadmap, right? You might go, oh, nope, there's a shortcut over here. Or, nope, now I need to take the long way, the scenic route. It changes. It should be a living, breathing document. But I do think looking at that at the early stages of your business to start thinking ahead, especially if it's a product that needs modification, how would we do that? How would we build that into our plan? And again, if you have some foundation early on, an idea of what you're going to do, you're not as shocked when you get that call, like I said, from Uzbekistan. I don't know why I'm saying Uzbekistan, but it just comes out right. If that's the country that calls you, you're going to go, oh crap, I have no idea. What am I doing? What's the export? Right? How do I do this? If you've thought about this and started doing your homework, and if you think you do want to go global and you have no knowledge, is one of those things. It's a great time while you're building your domestic business to start doing some training and get yourself familiar with how to do international trade. So again, when the time comes, either accidentally and someone reaches out to you, or you make a decision to start actually promoting your market and going to trade shows, you're not chasing a rolling ball down the hill. You've already laid a foundation. So I would start earlier, even if you're actually not selling internationally now. I would start that planning and make it a strategic plan.
Well said. And we are in agreement on that. So I definitely think that that's the way to go.
Great minds think alike. Any other questions?
So, last minute question. What are the free and reliable resources to get market research reports to get an entry into the targeted countries by
Mhm.
startups or small business?
Like I said, the U.S. Department of Commerce has country guides. So that's a first place to start because it'll tell you some of those things. And again, I like to go, I am perfect at reaching out and dialing and emailing. You can find a list of U.S. embassies that have foreign commercial service offices, or you can always, well, you can reach out to Rebecca too, but you can always reach out to the International Trade Administration in your local office for their commercial office, and they can often assist you in terms of finding all of these opportunities. In terms of finding customers, U.S. Commercial Service offers a program called the Gold Key Service, which is right around $1,000 or so. If you're looking at a specific market where they can connect you to a couple of verified buyers. So there's a lot of different places you can go. There's also industry specific, I would say, trade associations. So depending on what your industry is, the Wine Association, for example, again, not sure why I'm thinking wine on Friday, but they also have, Rebecca's laughing, but they do have some resources that can help you. If you are in the food industry, depending on where you are in the country, there's four agencies. One's called Food Export Northeast, Food Export Northwest. In the southern states, it's SUSADA, which stands for Southern United States Trade Association, I think, and then WUSADA in the western states. And they have tons of grant money, but they also have lots of people that work with them to help you with market research and going global. So use those government resources, go to trade.gov, and yes, there's Rebecca's putting peer advisors. There's a lot of places where you can get initial research. There is some software out there. Some of it's not free, but even ThomasNet, where you can look for suppliers and buyers, sometimes you can get some free access and research in there as well for customers more than market research.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Rebecca, for plugging in all of the links.
I want to come to
Obviously,
Maryland. You guys got it all.
yes, I also plugged in the University of Maryland Library has the business library portion with a lot of databases. So I put a link to that. It's free if you're on campus or with your University of Maryland login, you can search those remotely.
And yes, Rebecca put in Michigan, right? Michigan State is the Global Edge, I believe,
Exactly.
which is also a great. I hadn't thought of that till you just put it in, and I was like, oh yes, they do have a good program too. So there's lots of. Here's the thing: there's so many resources. We could probably talk for 10 hours about all the different resources in global trade and still probably miss some things, which is good news. And global trade is the one thing I will say, even with all of the tariffs and all of the things that are going on. I truly believe that the US government wants to increase our exports. So if you are a US company, I actually think it's a good time to start looking into going global, because if there is going to be any money invested rather than cut, it's probably going to be in helping companies grow in the United States and go more global. At least I'm hopeful and optimistic, because that's the goal that they have. And it does take resources to do that. And so I'm hopeful that if anything, we will see more resources coming than rather cuts in certain areas. So I think it's a good time to think about going global, even amidst the little bit of chaos.
Well
Yeah.
said.
All right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I hope to see everyone back on March 26th. And we also have more sessions scheduled with Kelly and Rebecca in April and in May.
Yes. And hopefully
Thank
this
you.
was useful to all of you. So
It's
awesome.
absolutely fantastic session. Thank you so much,
Thank
Kelly.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both. I appreciate you. Thank you so much, everyone. Nice to meet you all virtually.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.